polka.
Harvey Dent. Can we trust him?
The Batman, The Dark Knight, the showdown, the cinematic showdown of the ages. For this one, we snap the Baja Blast. We go in caffeinated and ready.
You're drinking a Baja Blast? Are they alcoholic? They have alcoholic ones now. Did you know that?
They have alcoholic Baja Blast? Are you serious?
Baja Blast is a Mountain Dew, right?
Yeah, it's the Taco Bell brand.
I'm pretty sure they have.
Where has this been my whole life?
I think so. I don't know. I'm pretty
what
sure
are you
I saw
doing
it
to me
the other day at the store. I saw alcoholic Mountain Dew of some kind.
Well, this is just breaking my whole reality.
Maybe it wasn't Baja Blast flavored, but I swear I saw alcohol infused Mountain Dew.
You shouldn't have told me this.
Yeah.
I shouldn't. This is one of those things I wish I could erase from my mind because it's going to be bad.
Too late. Some things you can't unsee, bro.
I can't undo this pain.
So we're doing the Batman, Matt Reeves, and the Dark Knight.
We're gonna hash it up. And the comments. Did you hear these Matt Reeves comments where he some red carpet or something? He bumped into Christopher Nolan and Nolan complimented him on the Batman, and he said, "Well, we're trying to beat you." I was like,
"Oh, Matt Reeves said that to Nolan?"
Yeah, and I was like, "That's a little harsh."
I mean, like, okay.
I respect the hell out of Matt Reeves, but that one was a tough pill to swallow. No, I respect both visions quite heavily, but I do I see a lot of people get so heated and comparison driven for both of these films. I wanted to sit down and cross compare them. What makes each one great? Where does one stand out in certain categories? Where does one fall short in the other? That kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
for that, I have a list of things I've kind of just been stewing on. I know some hardcore Batman enthusiasts who don't have a lot of love for The Dark Knight, which is interesting.
I would not say that I am Batman is my favorite of all time, but I don't know if I would be considered an enthusiast. And then this all goes back to the cartoon.
Yeah,
we grew
the
up with
90s animated, correct?
For me, my Batman will always be Kevin Conroy.
Hell yeah.
Who just his voice to that character. That's when I think Batman, that's the voice I hear.
Did you ever see they did a table read with Kevin Conroy doing the script of Dark Knight?
No, I don't. No, I've never have.
It's pretty great. I'll try and include that in the description for this. It's a cool one. But there's a lot of cool stuff out there like that. Kevin Conroy was around for a long time doing all kinds of appearances and stuff.
Yes, and unfortunately we lost him recently.
Yeah, that was also a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
To get into it though, discuss the Dark Knight as it compares to the Batman. The Batman has a lot going for it, and a lot of film bros will say that there's no challenging the Dark Knight. But that being said, it is a cinematic juggernaut, the Dark Knight. Chris Nolan is no slouch, as it were. He brings a lot of homage to the table, like some of the biggest referenced elements of the Dark Knight that I love. It brings to the table, I mean, obviously that opening sequence, Kubrick's The Killing, with the clown masks and everything. There's a big homage to Kubrick there. There's also a lot of elements interwoven from Michael Mann's Heat, and also, weirdly enough, The Fugitive.
In The Dark Knight? The Fugitive? Well, yeah. Okay.
Definitely a lot of the aerial photography. You watch the two back to back, you can see the influence.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot to the Batman as well. I mean, the Batman really goes after the detective angle, where I would argue that The Dark Knight kind of lacks.
Yes, I was just going to say, for me, I'd say the biggest difference is Batman is more a detective story, like sort of a
mystery, somewhat.
Yeah, Maltese Falcon, Sam Spade kind of classic film noir style going on. And Dark Knight has more. But I think that The Fugitive, actually, now that you mention that, brings it more of that thriller, Law and Order kind of drama. Yeah.
Especially given the locations used from Chicago, both made great use of the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that there were a lot of visual trends continued by the Batman from The Dark Knight. While the Batman was trying to get closer to source material versions of Gotham, it still included a lot of that realism element, which was new from Batman Begins and Dark Knight.
And with Batman Begins, I can remember that was one of the first ones I remember that didn't have an opening credits or even the title in the beginning.
Yeah, showed you the bat symbol in the sky.
Yeah, which I still to this day do not like. That's just me personally. I love opening credits. I don't know why. I do too, but I think it just gets you in the mood. I mean, I'm so used to it, some of my all-time favorite opening credits, I think of things like Indiana Jones, Games.
Yeah.
I think of Lord of the Rings. Even though the opening credits are very, short, I think of like Willy Wonka.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something about it's like the overture in when you go to see a play or a musical. Just kind of it's like
sets
all right,
the tone, gets you in there.
Time to like meditate.
I think personally, it depends on the movie that's being made. I think that there's room for both. And I think it needs to be, it's kind of like, there's different lenses, there's different editing techniques. I think it's can fit for the right story. And I think it depends. It's one of those things that's like not black and white for me.
Which, having said that, now I can't remember if the Batman has opening credits.
It's very simple. It doesn't like show. If memory serves, this is going off of it's been about a month since I watched it. I think that it just shows the title at the ending of the mayoral sequence or right before it. Something to that avail. I don't. It just shows the title of the Batman early on. But yeah, the Nirvana tie-in, that had that very new. There's a lot of new age cinema techniques past the point of the Dark Knight that this draws in, and the popularized song choice of a trailer to draw in an audience was one of them. The inclusion of the grunge phase of the 90s definitely brought about the tone of the different type of Bruce Wayne, different type of Batman that they were bringing in. And I did also want to bring up use of source material between both of them is interesting.
Okay.
The Batman has a number of comics that it draws from. The Long Halloween.
Yes, that one I know. Yes, which is a great comic. Yes,
there's a lot of people who say the tie-ins between that and Court of Owls is indicating where Warner Brothers is planning on taking this whole romp through the Matt Reeves universe. The Batman also makes use of Year 1 and Year 2 comic threads, which are both very interesting. That's where like all the pre-moralized versions of Bruce come about. He's still reeling from the death of his parents in a lot of ways. He hasn't
fully
built his code so much.
That iron-willed Batman that we know, that's more atypical to when you hear the term Batman. Who you think of.
And kind of in the Keaton sense, he doesn't really give a who he kills. He'll drop a bomb and blow up a whole factory of people.
I'll say that's an interesting thing with the Nolan take on Batman. I remember when that happened, and then after that, everyone was like, "Yeah, Batman never kills anyone."
Well, that's like, not. What? It's not so ironclad. It's just there's for a character that's been around as long as Batman. It's kind of in that Marvel sense. There's an iteration of it that exists for a lot of different interpretations.
Yeah, but I was like, I swear I remember Michael Keaton killing some people in the Tim Burton movies.
Oh, 1,000%. He killed a load of people.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I like Batman, because I think in terms of just there's more complexity to the character. At least you can get away with more with him in terms of, reinterpreting him than you can other superheroes.
Yeah, for sure. I think that he is one of the more interesting characters to try and reinvent. Yeah. I think we've gotten so many different versions. We've talked about before. I think that the Val Kilmer version kind of gets a bit of a bad rap. I think that story is very interesting. Like digging into the psychology of Batman is a very fascinating arena.
No, how often do we? There's another movie we tend to quote, Batman Forever. Technically, it's usually the
rubber lips are immune to your charms.
Oh no, that's Batman and Robin. What are you talking about?
Oh yeah, it is.
Rubber
you're
lips?
Right.
Rubber. Yes,
that episode. You're right. That's don't twist it. Don't you got it wrong. I'm hopped up on the dew, man. My man. There's a lot of neurons firing.
But that's a good one too. That's the George Clooney.
Yeah, no, that's not a good one. I wouldn't call it a good one.
But yeah, no,
it's an interesting one. I'll say that. Caffeine will kill you. It's interesting that you bring up Carrie, because I was also thinking. I also did write it down in my notes. I was thinking about Carrie had some comments about the Batman recently. Have you heard them?
Oh, he did. Okay, what did he say?
He actually said that he does not like the interpretation of the Riddler, in that he feels that it's too dark and too much for audiences. And
so he didn't like the like Seven or like Saw type of
Zodiac kind of take on
killer, serial killer vibe.
Yeah, and I don't think that I agree with Carrie on that one. I think it was time for that type of thing in a Batman movie.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. Like, I respect his take, but I disagree too. I'm 100% on your side, but I completely disagree with what you're saying.
Exactly, that kind of thing. It's like I respect the hell out of Carrie, but I can't fully agree with him because I love Paul Dano as well, and I feel like he did something kind of kick ass with that character.
I feel like if you think of, because if you were to do, like, if someone were to do a Carrey-esque interpretation of Riddler again,
it would be out of the 90s and very hard to swallow.
I feel like people would complain, it wasn't different enough,
or too much for kids, or that kind of thing. I think we're in an age where like the audiences of certain things have grown up with them and expect a certain level of maturity, and I think that this is definitely one of those things that goes into that territory. I think it's interesting watching the character of Batman having evolved from the 90s animated, which was very much for kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Batman is very dark. It's a lot darker than the Dark Knight to a lot of degrees. Obviously different arenas, but obviously Harvey Dent in the Dark Knight is a very dark interpretation of a villain. I would say more so than some of the source materials in areas. But
and I think too, thinking of, don't forget, you go back to the earlier days, a Pittsburgh native, Frank Gorshin, who did the Riddler in the Adam West
I'd
TV
forgotten
series.
Yeah,
so let's give and that's a different interpretation too,
and Cesar Romero as well. I mean, those were like a lot of the elements of Cesar Romero are emulated in the modern performances.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how we've gone back to a lot of that after all the evolution and stuff.
Like Batman can be that Adam West style, but he can also be the darker, the Batman or the Tim Burton. There is the thousand. When we talked about structure, the thousand faces, the hero with 1,000 faces. Here's one of them. Here's Batman, like the 1,000 faces of Batman. I have to disagree with Carrey's take, but
it's tricky because as things change and evolve, there's pain points. But
you could certainly say you didn't. Totally fine if you didn't like that interpretation of the Riddler, or he was. Wait, did he actually say he didn't think it was good, or that he just didn't like it?
He thought it was good. It was just he thought it went too far. He didn't. He thought it was too dark for a wide audience.
No. Yeah, give me. Go far with it.
But I think worth mentioning though that Dark Knight kind of pushed the boundaries of like the technicals of filmmaking a lot. I think like it was the first time a narrative film had ever incorporated analog IMAX ever. They actually misrated a Steadicam arm to try and fly it, and it immediately upon bringing it off of support snapped the Steadicam arm and threw a multi-dollar IMAX rig hurtling to the ground and to everyone's terror.
Yes, the perils of being on a set.
Yeah. Also, on the production of Dark Knight, I think it was on the first Dark Knight that they actually snapped a Maxim arm. Those are the ones that hang off of the Mercedes as they're driving them down the street. Mm-hmm. They actually lost one off of it, and it got run over. I think it was the Dark Knight that occurred on.
Is Dark Knight where Christian Bale had his famous meltdown, or was that something?
That was Terminator Salvation, which he did right after this.
Oh, that was That's right. Yes, it was. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Because I remember that because it was at Shane Hurlbut.
Yeah. Okay.
But the practical effects as well. Like obviously Nolan is a huge proponent of practical effects. Flipping the truck with the launch cannon, blowing up the hospital, which they actually did, and the only digital effect in that was replacing the windows because they didn't want to shower the teams in glass.
Yeah.
So many layers, and then on top of that, the immense practical effects. They had the incredible digital effect of Harvey Dent, which was a huge feat for the company Double Negative, who regularly work with Nolan. They are constantly pushing the boundaries. They also, a couple years later, with the black hole in Interstellar, they're cutting edge on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think that the effect of Harvey Dent definitely stands out visually. Mm-hmm. But the Batman, obviously like Greg Fraser has constantly pushed the boundary of lensing. He's working with some crazy, wild pieces of glass. He also shot Dune. He's pushing the boundaries, and the Batman made good use of the volume stage. Greg Fraser is a big user of that technology. They brought Gotham to life in a lot of ways. I know the tower where the bat signal is coming to the skies. They shot a lot of that for volume stage, and I think Carmine Falcone's backdrop in his lair, like elements like that, there was a lot of stuff used like that, and it saved them building a full real world Gotham.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but does a lot of the technology do they use like Unreal Engine, like video game like stuff? Did a lot of that come from video games or technology, like the programming? Or
I know that the Disney volume stage utilizes Unreal. I don't know if Warner Brothers does.
I was just curious. Yeah,
I know that there's a number of different even types of volume stages in use now. So I mean, it kind of depends on
in use now that can do different. Gotcha.
Yeah, it would depend on who's using it, who's doing that kind of stuff. And yeah, so it's like there's various volume stages out there. I'm pretty sure that Disney's uses Unreal. I would imagine that others do, but I don't know for sure.
I thought that was interesting. That
I think Warner Brothers has stake in Unreal, so that wouldn't surprise me. But they took a different tact because obviously Dark Knight was all about practicality. They couldn't really change anything about the city to a large extent. I mean, they did a lot through combining locations, shot to shot, and all that. But I know that they augmented existing Chicago buildings to be like Wayne Enterprises and things like that, but to very minimalistic change.
Well, and The Dark Knight, of course, has that more grounded feel to it. Feels like you're in like a modern metropolitan city like Chicago or New York.
Has that fugitive, that Michael Mann type feel to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that natural, like almost like you're shooting a documentary type feel.
Yeah. The aerial photography in Dark Knight is fantastic. They made damn good use of those helicopters and that. The IMAX footage in that movie is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
That opening shot, too, just pulling it. Like, you have no idea, even upon rewatches, like, you have no idea which window it's going to be, and then it's just bam. From the word go, though, on both, I think that the pacing of each is very clear from that word go. You have this, in The Batman, you have this very long, growing...
Slow burn, yes. Which I love.
Yeah, you like right from the word go, you are clearly understanding that this is a different movie than The Dark Knight. It is not a fast-paced romp of an action sequence. It is this slow, creeping murder sequence.
Yeah, no, it definitely has that slower pace up until I'd say the final act goes into that, leans into that Dark Knight territory.
Yeah,
if you will,
for sure, and it gets some crazy good moments, especially that drop in from the ceiling gets my adrenaline going every time.
And I really do. I would say this. I like both.
Oh, I absolutely like both. No question. They are very different animals, though.
Mm-hmm. I would say I really do. I have become over the years. Whether it's more nostalgic factor for me, I have started to gravitate back to the more Caped Crusader style of Batmans, like the Tim Burton versions. I really do, Joel especially those first two Tim Burton movies are something else. Mm-hmm. Especially Batman Returns, like they let him just go off the chain. Oh yeah, it's just going all over the place with that, which is not a what's the term? Like it's not a isolated case. You see that a lot. The director comes along, does something really good, and they're like the first time they, like if they're new or like they haven't worked with them before, they keep them on a shorter leash, and then usually the sequel they're like, oh okay, here it is, go do whatever you want.
We had talked about some of the influences of Dark Knight, but the Batman is definitely going after that like Fincher 7 kind of grungy detective vibe. Like it is very much cut from a different cloth than the Batman. It's a dark underground detective story, whereas Dark Knight is like an action set piece.
Yeah.
Not that both don't stem into each of those territories, but it is interesting the difference. And I would say that The Dark Knight deals with Batman directly as a human character, whereas the Batman is more about the world building and the atmosphere, and how it deals with Bruce as a character. Pretty much from the outset of that whole trilogy, the focus was in dealing with a superhero character who is extraordinarily human. And I think in The Dark Knight, we see the one thing of any that we get of Bruce as a character in that installment is seeing him at his lowest point after Rachel is killed. We see him in the most human moment possible. I think that scene for Bruce's character is everything. While it's not maybe, the most visually striking, the most, extraordinary set piece, it is, I think, the most emotionally and the most story-wise for Bruce important scene in the franchise, even. The morning after he learns that Rachel was murdered. Alfred comes to him and decides not to give him the letter.
Because for a second I thought maybe you were just talking about the shot where he's standing over the rubble. And like,
well, I mean, I would personally consider that part of the same sequence. I think that whole sequence that leads him into that moment shows how humanly flawed Bruce is as a character. Like he's not, the Superman who's going to let everything bounce off of him. Superman, while, obviously only invulnerable to his emotions, still kind of lets things roll off of him to a degree, whereas Bruce feels everything.
Well, I'm trying to think. I would argue that in the Batman, he's certainly,
Oh,
getting
absolutely.
emotional as well. But I mean, but he's much more fueled by anger.
Yeah, I think that the rage aspect tends to outweigh that in the Batman.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's even a negative. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like obviously the sequence of Andy Serkis's Alfred and Robert Pattinson's Batman in the hospital is a very similar vibe. We see his connection to Alfred as a very that's his last family member as he describes him.
Yeah,
You know, that's also a similarly human moment, but I think it's kind of leading in an initial character development, whereas in The Dark Knight we're seeing a more fully formed character deal with a crushing blow.
Mm-hmm.
Again, similar moments, but again, you know, it might even be a more apt comparison to compare the Batman to Batman Begins. But as they're both held up as the two most shining examples of interpreting the character, I think it's interesting to compare them to one another because they are so different, but at the same time so great at what each is respectively trying to achieve.
Well, I certainly really enjoy the character journey of the Batman, the Matt Reeves film, because I like how he sort of comes to realize, at least at the end I get from it, that he sort of realizes Batman, this might have started out as a tool of vengeance for him, a tool of revenge, of retribution. He realizes that Batman can be more, can be something, you know, better than just that.
Well, to that token, I think that both have incredibly well-crafted ending monologues.
Yeah, I would agree, yes.
That kind of both perfectly summate each character's interpretation. Because, like, they're not totally dissimilar, but there are differences in how they're interpreted. And I think each kind of perfectly encapsulates what that character is.
Mm-hmm.
In The Dark Knight, obviously, Batman is the more dark knight, quote unquote, that will fall on the sword to become whatever he needs to be to protect the city, even from itself.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, the more grungy, dark, dingier tale has the more uplifting ending. They kind of dovetail one another to a degree, which is interesting.
Like, they kind of end up where the other one begins.
Yeah, and it's like there's a hopeful tone to the Matt Reeves Batman in becoming a hopeful symbol to the city, whereas the Nolan they kind of invert on one another, which is interesting. And I hadn't really thought of it that way before, but the Christian Bale take on the Batman on the Dark Knight will become this almost evil figure.
Martha B and Martha A.
Oh God, no. My brain. That's a part of the problem is I have like Batman knowledge and dark knowledge flowing through the same neurons right now.
You have the Dark Knight and it's like, wait.
Short circuiting.
Well, okay, so if we're talking, here's an interesting, like, who do you think has the better, I know this isn't Dark Knight, this is Dark Knight Rises, but who do you think does the better Catwoman performance?
Well, since you bring that up, I thought it was I actually do have this in my notes. Zoe Kravitz was almost cast in The Dark Knight Rises as Catwoman.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's actually, if you go through the bonus features, she discusses this, that she was one of the final round choices, but it ultimately went to Anne Hathaway. And she was very upset about that, as you can see in her interviews. Oh. I mean, at the same time, she was doing like the X-Men movies for First Class.
Has it been that long ago? God damn.
Yeah. It was 2012. It was the same time that The Avengers was released.
The
Dark Knight Rises and the Avengers came out in the same year.
Oh God, that's right. I forgot that.
Yeah, wild ride, huh?
Nope.
Yeah, I can't remember what year. Can't remember what year First Class came out, but I think it was like a couple years after that. Yeah, Zoe Kravitz was almost Catwoman for Dark Knight Rises.
Interesting. Okay.
And she really wanted that role. I think she was not happy that she lost out to Anne Hathaway, but I think Anne Hathaway's performance was pretty good.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it. There's a grounded technical aspect to the Nolan films that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The Dark Knight kind of pushed it forward with like the R&D department, kind of continued that thread from Batman Begins. And I think that very grounded realism to the tech is part of why that world feels so tangible, and you feel like you can walk right through that big IMAX frame into that room with them.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And then like I found it interesting that the Batman's take on all the tech is kind of like a cobbled together, like very hand built by Bruce's hands.
More MacGyvered almost.
Yeah. And I think that there's something equally interesting about that. Well, maybe more of a leap of logic, but I think that's part of what makes the Batman universe interesting is it is a bit of a more leap of logic. It is more of that comic type universe.
Yes.
While still keeping a shred of the realism, it kind of plays in both. It has a foot on both sides of that, which is cool.
Yeah. You don't get that, even though it's a front on both sides of the character, you don't get that sort of billionaire playboy aspect that gets, shown a little bit sometimes in The Dark Knight and Batman Begins.
I think a lot of it. I think that's like the whole focus of Bruce interpretation in the Nolan films is just showing him like in hotels buying things.
Yeah.
Showing off.
Whereas now credit, they go more for the, like you said, the year one vibes in Batman. He almost
wants nothing to do with the Bruce portion of his psyche.
Yeah. That's a perfect way to put it. Like there really is no Bruce Wayne in the Batman.
He's almost entirely encompassed by the psychology of Batman.
He is completely consumed right now by the Batman side of him.
And I would say it's that moment with Andy Serkis's Alfred that kind of snaps him back from that. That's the first like inkling of him like stepping back into that, and it kind of grows from there.
No, that is I would that is probably say one of my critiques is I would have liked maybe a little bit more interaction or scenes, just me personally, with him and Alfred, with Andy Serkis and Robert Pattinson, because I thought I really was liking the dynamic the two of them were starting to like. Yeah, the chemistry that I was kind of feeling. I think there's only a couple scenes though with them, maybe only 2.
Oh no, definitely more than that. There's a good, like the initial him returning to the city-bound cave in the sewers. There's that initial scene with Alfred. Definitely the breakfast scene where they're decoding, a few others. He helps him along the way, like actually figuring out like the ciphers of the Riddler and everything. So there's a good few. Like it probably more limited than other installments, like The Dark Knight, like Rises. But yeah, good use of both. I think that gives it a good foundation to grow upon for future installments. And honestly, I am a big proponent of like being hungry for things like that. Like that's part of my draw for a Batman Part 2. Like that's part of why I will be back to see more.
Yeah, no, I definitely like. I'm trying to think, which one do I personally enjoy more? I think lately I've come to enjoy the ones that slightly keep that comic book edge to them.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's just me. That kind of go that more fantastic route, that more mythological, that more fairy tale. Only because we know where I lie when it comes to love stories like that. Yeah, because the real world has disappointed me enough. I shall escape into another one.
Yeah, I think that's where like a lot of like avid comic book fans have a distaste for The Dark Knight, because it's kind of like of that cloth of like a piece of cinema versus just being a comic book movie.
Yeah, no, and I can see that.
Which, either hand tossing the juggle, it's which way you're going to go with it. And I think that, it pushed some boundaries for sure in a different direction. It definitely took some different swings with Harvey Dent. Mm-hmm. He wasn't this harsh gang leader. He was just you're just seeing a downtrodden moment. And, giving us such a short story thread for him, like that's definitely different than other interpretations. That goes with the territory of letting anybody step into that world and play around. You're going to get differences of opinion, different interpretations, different stories, really. Yeah. Which is a cool play. Like, you want to get really down to it, look at Batman Returns versus the Batman's interpretation of the Penguin. You're dealing basically just a pure and simple gang leader versus the rawest weirdness of Danny DeVito ever. Yeah, absolutely. So
who gives a great performance as well in his role as the Penguin, I think.
I always think of that meme.
Oh God.
It's gold. But yeah, I do think it interesting that I come back to a lot of the similarities between the Batman and the Dark Knight, and it does deal in some of the weirdness, like the Arkham weirdness of some of the villains, but it's largely the case that between both films, all the villains are very much grounded gang leaders, more so than these like hyper caricaturized psychopaths from the comics, which like they're very much like these caricatured psychological studies in the comics, whereas in a lot of the film adaptations, they're more on the gang leader side of things. And, I think every interpretation of Batman has kind of juggled between the two of those on the case of the villains, but it's interesting how the films lean a little bit more on the gang side of things.
Well, yeah, and like you look at the Carmine, Falcone, and Maroni the gangs. Like, I mean, that's a big thing in the Gotham lore.
Yeah.
Of that. It's like, who's going to control the territories?
The ever-flowing landscape of gang control.
Yeah, and violence.
And all the henchmen that go with that kind of change hands. Like, you see, I remember in a lot of the comics, there was like, you see a lot of like the same names float in and out of gangs and stuff. And like, it's kind of indicative of like where the power lies.
Well, it's weird how it's almost like Batman, because it's such a popular character, has developed its own language in like telling a story, like its own subgenre of the superhero. In like, okay, if we're going to do a Batman movie, we can certainly do it. It's like, okay, how are we going to set it out? Here's the pieces. Here's what people expect. What can we do with it?
Yeah. And I love, both have been credited as taking sight from the Long Halloween graphic novel and comics threads. There's a lot, especially I love the Halloween sequence in the Batman. I think it's one of the most endearing sequences in the film. I think like it really shows the visceral nature. Like it is you are going into the underground. You're going to watch Pattinson beat the out of some people.
Which I would say I enjoy, at least from Batman Begins, if I'm comparing it to that. I think I enjoy the fighting sequences a bit more in the Batman.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Just because of the way it was shot.
It has that dark,
I think they got
gritty.
A little bit better. They certainly got better at showing what was kind of going on.
I liked from Batman Begins digging into the ninja lore, which hadn't been really explored on screen.
Yeah, no, I did too. Yes, I did. I really do enjoy that. Absolutely.
I think if there is one thing in Batman Begins that they got right, it was digging into the origins.
Yes.
Like that.
No. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
But yeah, there's as far as Batman, I mean, there's just endless amounts of material to get through. I think we have room for plenty more interpretations for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so many. Like I said, 1,000 faces. There are like over 1,000 different faces of Batman.
Well,
I think of
just the iterations of different villains that we haven't like.
Yeah,
look, it's a Spider-Man levels of endless villains that they could explore. I mean, the Court of Owls, like all that stuff. There's plenty of places to go that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I still think Mask of the Phantasm, the animated movie, is still
what a great flick. A
great Batman film. In fact, I would love to see that updated and done live action. I feel like that is a good detective story.
Yeah. I love the animated series, and that's one of the most intriguing detective story, like one of the best mysteries they put forward, I think, in that run of them. Oh, I also wanted to touch on the differences of the film scores for both.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
Because Batman was essentially given to one singular composer in Michael Giacchino, which was interesting because I felt that was one of the drawbacks to Hans being given sole proprietorship in Rises. Not that he didn't do a great job. I thought that was a great score, but it was differently toned because they removed James Newton Howard from the equation where he had been for the two previous installments. I think that blend of the hopeful tones of James Newton Howard and the dark shreds of Hans Zimmer were such an interesting blend for what they were creating. I think that those tones are incredible, both in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. I think that they had it's to combine composers like that is such a challenging battle, and they did something genuinely fascinating with those two. But then we bring Giacchino in. He brought that soulfulness from like the Lost scores and the Planet of the Apes scores, which he had collaborated previously with Matt Reeves. There's a lot to both that are in very different arenas.
Yeah, I think I swear now I remember like when the Batman first came out, you telling me this conversation. I feel like we've had it before.
Yeah.
About the scores. I remember like
as with many, I'm sure we've had more than once. But yeah, you and I have talked to the Lost score quite a bit. I think that was actually partly how you and I had initially touched base. We realized we were both avid fans of Lost, and I thought Giacchino did something genuinely special with that score, especially like that. If Lost had nothing else, it had soulful, deep, weld emotion encapsulated music. Yeah, and Giacchino was definitely the one responsible for that.
No, yeah. Was there something with like when it came out, people didn't like the score or something that we talked? I'm trying to remember now our earlier conversation about this.
I can't remember anybody disliking it. I had my misgivings initially. Okay, I wasn't sure about Giacchino initially, but then he delivered. I don't know why I ever doubted him. I mean, he's a great composer. I loved him from the first time I heard him in Lost. Like like, but at the time he was coming off of multiple Marvel installments. He had recently done Up. So I was like, oh, this guy who's currently floating in Disney realms. No, but he unquestionably knocked it out of the park. I thought he did a fantastic job. And just at the time I'm reading all this stuff about how dark of a take this is going to be on the Batman universe. And then they're like, oh, Michael Giacchino's doing it. He's coming in from all these Pixar films. That's where that came from.
Okay.
No, I thought he did a fantastic job for sure. He's fun to watch in interviews and stuff, and like they show him quite often like on the actual like floor with like all the other musicians. And I remember this is slightly off topic, but he was in, I think, War of the Planet of the Apes, doing the score for War of the Planet of the Apes. He had one of the performers from the actual original musical compositions of the Planet of the, I think it was like Beneath the Planet of the Apes or one of the others. But it was cool to see him like bring it full circle with the actual performers. That's neither here nor there. That's just some Giacchino fun.
Some Giacchino. Try
hell of a guy.
Giacchino,
Yeah.
the newest flavor from Starbucks.
Caramel Giacchino.
Caramel Giacchino.
That sounds like a great Kang villain name, Caramel Giacchino.
Caramel Giacchino. Oh my God! Don't take it. No, I got it.
It's mine. I claimed it.
Dibs.
The Batman, I think, has the best interpretation of Arkham, personally.
Yeah.
I liked the ironclad take on like the architecture of Arkham, and just like the villains communicating between rooms and stuff. It just felt very much in the realm of the comics, and then but taken to a different visual stratosphere. And so I thought if there was one area that they really achieved, I think that Arkham, in comparison to the comics, was one of the biggest for me.
I like Gotham more in the Batman than I do in the Dark Knight. That's just my own personal opinion. But I
could agree with that. Yeah.
But of course, if you had the Gotham from the way I thought they did Gotham really well in the Batman. But if you took that Gotham and put it into the Dark Knight, or threw Christian Bale's Batman into that one, it wouldn't. I don't think it would work. I mean, it would certainly work, but I feel like something would be off. It would clash a bit.
Yeah, I think the grounded realism would shake apart if you did something like that. That's so much the soul of that Nolan interpretation.
Yeah, like just his bat suit alone wouldn't feel like it would feel off a little bit to me. I would be like,
well, it's like it goes back to like we were talking about the tech, like the bat suit just feel. And like I also wanted to bring up like the use of the makeup behind the eyes when he pulls the cowl off. Like it's like they used like a 90s grunge thing, visually, but it was like it also kind of explained, like, you look back at Batman Returns and Keaton pulls off the cowl and he just has, you can see his eyes like not blackened. For like moments before he pulls it off, and that's just, it's like,
I still love how in the end of that, when he rips it off, the ending, right when he's trying to convince Catwoman. Oh, another Catwoman performance. How could I forget Michelle Pfeiffer and her
the
Catwoman
best
performance?
Nothing against Zoe Kravitz, nothing against Anne Hathaway. Michelle Pfeiffer takes the award in that category.
I always loved how he ripped the cowl off, like, even to this day, I don't know what it is, just how he rips it off. He's just like, it just takes it off entirely.
Yeah, it just like rips apart like silicone.
And he's like trying to convince Selena not to, like, that they're the same person.
No, it was interesting. And, we didn't really dig into Zoe Kravitz's performance, but I liked the like struggling apartment, like can't make ends meet take on Catwoman. It was like every other time we had seen her, she was like a stable individual and like had her together, but it was like Catwoman is like almost like robbing places out of necessity, and it's like a very character fitting take. I thought that like the way they handled it and how she wove in with Pattinson kind of using her, like, it fit with his character kind of being a vengeful piece of
I honestly, I kind of preferred Kravitz's take on Catwoman as opposed to Anne Hathaway's. That's just my own.
Yeah, again, like you said, each is right for its own universe.
Yeah.
I would be interested to see what would have happened had she been cast in the Nolan universe. It would have been very interesting.
Like that
being said,
like everybody was like, "Oh, Robert Pattinson, he's not going to do. I don't know if he can be Batman." I was totally fine with him being Batman from the get go. I'm like, yeah, he'll do fine.
Also, since you bring that up, it was interesting promising as hell. I remember before The Dark Knight had come out, everybody was saying Heath Ledger, oh, that's going to be a terrible choice. And the internet was like exploding at the time, so like freaking out, saying that they're going to ruin the Joker.
Yeah.
With this, because at the time he was only really known for being a heartthrob and stuff. Yeah. It was like, you know, he was in like 10 Things I Hate About You, that kind of stuff. And, you know, the people didn't give him a lot of credit. And then that first teaser came out and you heard the audio of him and people started to be like, oh, well, maybe we were wrong. And then like, boom, exploded bigger than any comic book movie in history. I think it was the first comic book movie ever to make $1 billion.
That was the same too with Michael Keaton when he was cast. Everyone was like, oh no, because he was known for like Mr. Mom and stuff. Like, oh, he's going to be Batman? No way.
Then he comes on screen and goes, you want to get nuts?
Let's get nuts.
Well, that's a lot of nuts. Yeah, it's. I think it all boils down to they're just very different interpretations off of different pieces of source material and two incredibly different approaches, for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, Barry Keoghan's performance as the Joker in the Batman is also very, very impressive. It'll be very interesting to see where he takes that going forward in following installments. It's largely implied that the Batman has already captured him, so that'll all be very, very interesting. They did have a deleted scene where the Batman goes and visits with the Joker, and it's very confrontational, but it kind of exploded online because you get a better view of Barry Keoghan as the Joker.
I can see why certain avid comic book fans tend to gravitate towards the Batman, because it is more of a detective story. It's not a anarchy, terrorism message piece, which you know the Dark Knight is it does that to a great degree, and it is a post 9/11 terrorism piece to a large degree.
I think that is that is true. I think that is one of the things I do like about the Batman is a little bit lower stakes kind of.
Yeah.
Although I will say, like, I would have been totally fine if the climax of the Batman where he's in like the basketball arena, right? Or something. He's in like Madison Square Garden, whatever.
The Gotham equivalent, yeah.
Yeah, of it. And like it gets flooded and everyone gets trapped inside. I would have been totally fine if you had that on just a smaller scale. I liked the smaller scaleness of the Batman as opposed to the Dark Knight. That's one thing I do like. I like it where, you know, like if that the same outcome, but like maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's just a much smaller, just one building and it's just a family or something. I don't know. Because like at the end of that third act of Batman definitely goes into the Dark Knight realm and like the action picks up. It gets more action heavy. If you look at like what the sort of film noir classics that they were trying to emulate, the endings usually are not that wham bang wallop that you got. They're a little bit more quiet, so to speak. Like look at Chinatown. Like the ending, very different ending, a very different theme kind of going on. It has that tragic ending to it, but there's not this, you know, grandiose climax to it. It's a very subtle sort of, it just happens and then that's it type deal. So that would probably be one of my major critiques of the Batman is I would have, if I personally would have,
if I was the thief, I would have maybe brought the ending down a little bit, turned it down a little bit. I wouldn't have, in terms of scale and scope.
Yeah, in terms of the scope and the scale of it, I wouldn't have had it as big as it was.
Yeah. That's fair.
I really enjoyed that, you know, it's just him and like the sort of seedy underbelly that he's going to explore with it.
Yeah, I can agree with that, but I think I see what they're going for is they're trying to get him in touch with the whole moment was about, you know, the monologue at the end and getting him in touch.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely.
With the whole scope of the city. So like, I see where their head's at and where they're and I think it's largely about, you know, the scale of that event too and flooding the entire city. There's a number of ways they can take that in terms of story. You know, there's a Mr. Freeze aspect where he freezes over everything. There's a Clayface thing that they could do. There's a number of different ways they can take a flooded Gotham and tie it in with existing villains.
It makes me think of Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, the seawall thing and all that.
Yeah, the ending is just them at the seawall. It could have very well been at the top of what's the name of the company in Blade Runner that does all the
Wallace Corporation
is it the Wallace Corporation? Yeah.
In 2049 it's Wallace. I'm trying to think, why can't I remember from Final Cut? Why can't I remember it?
Well, what's the one in the original Blade Runner?
That's what I'm thinking of. I can't. My brain is farting. I've put too many neurons in my head today.
Nakatomi. It's Nakatomi. No.
Nakatomi plot.
Oh, anyway, yes, the wall. Like they could have very well had this big, huge thing happen in the Wallace Company headquarters or something on top or in the middle of the city, but they chose to we're going to have it out here in the middle of nowhere on this seawall.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
We're going to have to eventually get to both of those. But
and that was kind of the ending I was sort of expecting at the end of the Batman.
Yeah, something more direct.
Something a little bit more turned down. But again, I'm just giving you my take on it. Doesn't make me right.
It does. Yeah, there's just so much to both of these. I can't really pigeonhole. This is, if I'm forced to boil it down, I would say that Dark Knight probably has more rewatchability. Mm-hmm. Batman is more one for its pace and for its tone. I kind of have to dip in every so once in a while, but when I do, man, does it hit hard? Like, I think I'm more often want to watch The Dark Knight, but I think that Batman pulls a hell of a punch. Like it does not. It goes pretty damn hard. Like it does not quit the duration. I think its runtime may be a bit of an issue. I think it's a little long.
Yeah.
I think you could cut it down.
They could have trimmed a little bit of it out there. Again,
at least get it under that 3 hour mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one. If I were forced to like nitpick some of its negatives, I would say it's a little on the long side for what it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think in The Dark Knight, it's unfortunate that Heath Ledger passed away, but I feel I need more closure to the Joker character. There was intention of leaving that door open to possibility of using the Joker in the third installment, but we will never know what that looked like because they decided not to utilize the Joker on the circumstance of Heath Ledger's passing. So, that's what that is. Chips fall where they may. That's unfortunate reality. It is what it is. But yeah, I think both bring incredible merit to the character. I think, you can't have the Batman 13 years after The Dark Knight, 13 years of hindsight, looking at what the character can be, and for all of its comics, what can be brought to the table. I think, it's kind of like 2049 versus Blade Runner. There's a lot of hindsight, and 2049 is a better detective story than Blade Runner, but it also had how many years of reflecting on that. So can you have one without the other is the real question.
That's a good question.
I think they're both phenomenal films. I think Matt Reeves has a lot more to bring to the table over the years. I think Nolan might be out of the comic game permanently, but
well, we'll see. But yeah, no, I would think so, maybe.
Yeah, there's talk of him doing Bond, but I think great filmmakers coming in and tapping into the comic arena is something that's maybe met with a little bit of taboo, but every so often we get a gem out of it. So I'm in for it.
Agreed.
Overall, last takes. What do you think? Batman versus The Dark Knight.
Dark Knight.
I'm not saying necessarily choose one. Just last thoughts.
I mean, they're both great. I really do like them. Just I think you put it in a good way. Like you can watch The Dark Knight a lot. The Batman, you kind of
is a more every so often.
Yeah, every so often watch.
Yeah, but
it's more of kind of like it's a heavier beer to go down.
Yes. That's a great analogy. I like that. In the vein of our food analogies.
So we got to come back to food or drink with us.
Yeah. No, they're both pretty great. I do want to see where the Batman Matt Reeves universe, how that evolves. It's definitely taking a page from, the Joker with Joaquin and Todd Phillips. I did like the train sequence, tying a bit of that in the Batman, kind of making this more R-rated side of the DC universe kind of a reality, which is kind of cool. But yeah, seeing where they go with all that, I think is going to be fun, and a lot of ways they can take it. But they got good legs, so we'll see where it goes.
Tyrell, that was the corporation.
Tyrell, why in God's name did I forget that?
That's it. I looked.
I should be shot.
I had to look it up there. It was bugging me.
I don't believe you. You just had it in the holster the whole time.
Harvey Dent. Can we trust him?